In light of current circumstances and modified church schedules, Pastor Geckler asked me to record a Contend Podcast episode for the evening service for Dunes Baptist Church this evening. So this is a special edition of the Contend Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to this special edition of the Contend Podcast. This is an exciting episode for me because Pastor Geckler specifically asked me to record a episode and use it for the Sunday evening service at Dunes Baptist Church. So I'm very excited about that. It's an honor to have the Contend Podcast used in this facet, so I'm very excited about it. Today we're going to continue looking at our contenders through history, and we're going to look at the life of Daniel. And as I normally have one main point that I want to bring out, there's 2 points from this lesson that I want because the life of Daniel is just so incredible. There's so much just in the several chapters of the book of Daniel, and although there's not a lot written, there's so much packed into those several chapters. So I want to look at 2 different things, but we're going to start out Daniel chapter 1 verse 8, a very familiar verse. It says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." It's a very common verse, a very well-known verse. Probably when I mention Daniel, that's the verse that many people think of. But as far as the life of Daniel, when we look at it, we see Daniel and his friends, they're taken into captivity, and they're in a strange land, under a foreign government, and they're here and they're being tried, and they're being kind of proven to see what they're made of, so to speak, and they're given the king's meat and the king's wine to drink, and Daniel, knowing that this is a violation of the law, wants to abstain from those things, and so he requests the prince of the eunuchs that he might. But the point that I want to bring out, and the point that I think is very important for us is contenders, even in 2020, is this first phrase says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself." I think if we're going to contend for the faith, if we're going to be a contender, and if we're going to go forward as a contender and serve the Lord and accomplish things for him, we do need to purpose in our hearts that we're going to be a contender. We need to pre-plan. We need to think about these things before they come, before we're presented with the situation or the problem. I've heard it said that the man who thinks he can and the man who thinks he can't are both right. And I think that's a good quote, in the fact that many times if we start something with a defeated attitude, we don't succeed. But if we start with an attitude of I can do this, I'll be able to finish this, then many times we can get through that situation. But the same is true with contending. Someone who thinks that they can stand probably will, and someone who doesn't think they're going to be able to stand for the Lord probably won't stand for the Lord when the going gets tough, so to speak. So we, like Daniel, need to purpose in our heart that we're not going to defile ourselves, or that we're not going to do anything that we shouldn't do, or we're not going to be someone who falls by the wayside, but we need to be someone who's contending. We need to purpose that I'm going to be a contender. I'm going to do something for the Lord. I'm going to stand up for what's right. I'm going to tell folks about Christ. I'm going to do all the things that I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to do whatever it may be. We know the commands from the Bible, and we need to purpose in our heart that we're going to do those, that we're going to be a contender in those areas. So that's the first point, that we as Christians, we as contenders for the faith, need to first purpose that we're going to do it, purpose that we're going to contend. Then we see also in Daniel chapter 6, probably another one of the very famous stories of the book of Daniel. Starting verse 4, it says, "And the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could not find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God." These men, you know the story. This is right before Daniel is thrown into the den of lions, and the men make a decree and have the king sign it to trip up Daniel, because they knew that he was a man who followed the law of God. They knew that he was someone who was going to be praying at a certain time, and they knew that he was someone who did pray to God. He didn't pray to man. He prayed specifically to the Lord, and he was someone who was was very dedicated to that. And we see that and we know that because they said they were looking for occasion against him. They were trying to find fault. They were trying to find something or even manufacture something against him. But it says here in verse number 5 that they couldn't, what does it say? Except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So they said, we can't find anything wrong with what he's doing unless we make the law of his God wrong. The only thing that we can find against him is that he's really a slave, so to speak, to the law of his God. He's someone who is very dedicated to what God has set forth for him. So we do need to realize a couple things from here, that we need to be hard workers and we need to be doing what we're supposed to be doing, because it says they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful. He was doing what he was supposed to be doing. He wasn't someone, they weren't able to look at his job and say, oh, well, he's not serving the king like he should be, so we can find that, or he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing in regard to how he interacts with the people, so we can present that. But he was faithful in everything that he was doing. He was very set in his ways, so to speak, as far as he was very much faithful in his work and faithful in his dealings with others. So they couldn't find that against them. They had to go to the law of his God. They had to look and see, okay, well, we know that he's going to be praying to God, and we know that he's going to be following the law of God, so we need to make something of that wrong so that we can trip him up. But that brings us to our next point. Just as we saw, we need to purpose that we're going to be faithful, and we need to decide that we're going to stay faithful and that we're going to be a contender for the faith. Next, that we see from the life of Daniel that we actually need to put what we purpose into practice. So if we purpose that we're going to be a contender for the faith, we need to do it. Don't just say it. Don't just give it lip service saying, oh, I'm going to stand for the Lord. I'm going to contend for the faith, and I'm going to do things for God, but actually put that into practice. And when we do that, and when we are kind of sold out for Christ and sold out to the law of our God, as it says here, the law of his God, when we're sold out to that, then people won't be able to find occasion against us when in our work. Now, they'll manufacture things against us, they'll make lies up against us because they don't like how we maybe pray for our meals or do things of that nature. But we do need to realize that they'll have to make it up. They won't be able to point at how we're being dishonest, or how we're cheating the boss, or how we're lying about certain things. They'll have to make it up because they know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So when we purpose something, when we purpose to do what is right, and when we purpose to be a contender for the faith, we need to not only purpose to do it, but put it into practice. Something very important from the life of Daniel. We can see that throughout every story, from his friends being thrown into the fiery furnace. And I truly believe that because of the stand Daniel took in chapter 1 of purposing not to defile himself, I believe that his friends found it much easier to follow his example, because we do see that it says Daniel purposed in his heart, and then his friends followed that example. And we see because of his example, they were able to face the fiery furnace. And then we see Daniel thrown into the den of lions because of his stand for the things of God and his unwillingness to compromise on praying to the Lord. So we as Christians need to do the same thing. We need to purpose in our heart that we won't defile ourselves. Purpose in our heart that we're going to be a contender for the faith. And maybe that'll help some others coming behind us say, hey, he did it, now I can do it too because of the stand that he took. But once we purpose to do it, we need to put it into practice as well and be a contender. Don't just say you're going to do it, but be a contender for the faith. So from the life of Daniel, we need to purpose to be a contender, but also practice that contending. Just remember in this uncertain time that our peace is not found in the absence of trouble, in the absence of trials, but in the presence of God in our lives. And just as Daniel purposed, we just learned about, we need to purpose as well to be peaceful as we contend for the faith and not neglect the things that we're supposed to be doing. But remember to contend even when we are struggling with things, even when there are things going on that we don't understand. So we need to contend and have the peace of God. We need to purpose to have that peace and then do everything we can to have have that peace of God because we do have peace with God. So I hope you enjoyed this special edition of the Contend Podcast, a little different layout than normal, but I hope you enjoyed it. Go ahead and subscribe to the Contend channel and also subscribe to the Dunes Baptist Church channel. We have some of our morning services up there already, so check those two channels out, and don't forget to not be a pretender, but be a contender.